Welcome to episode 3 of the Africa podcast. Today we're joined by Mr. Johan Burger from the United Arab Emirates University to dive into the African Continental Free Trade Area, AfCFTA. Get ready for an insightful discussion on its impact and opportunities. Let's get started. What does Africa have in store for the new generation?
Very interesting developments have taken place over the past few months in the field of trading. I'm looking at the African Continental Free Trade Area. It has started off in 2021, the 1st of January, with a lot of fanfare. And the question now is, will it truly take off in 2024? And more specifically, how do we see the role of the Guided Trade Initiative, or referred to as the GTI, in this launch of the AfCFTA? As I said, it was launched on the 1st of January 2021, but by September 2022, no trades had taken place. The AfCFTA Secretariat attempted to justify the lack of trade by showing progress in the finalization of the rules of origin, etc. However, to avoid despondency, it was necessary to demonstrate improvement in intra-Africa trade. Now, in a recent report by the Economic Community of Africa, ECA, Africa's share of global trade remained at less than 3%, and it was primarily driven by merchandise trade. This indicates that African countries continue to trade with the rest of the world more than with themselves. Intra-Africa trade as a share of global trade declined, as a matter of fact, from 14.5% in 2021, when the AfCFTA was launched, to 13.7% in 2022. Over the same period, intra-Africa exports declined as a percentage of total exports from 18.22% to 17.89%, and intra-African imports declined from 12.81% to 12.09%. So instead of going forward, we are declining, we're reversing. That is why in September 2022, the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat launched then the GTI, with 8 countries trading 96 products. In the first phase, Cameroon, Egypt, Ghana, Kenya, Mauritius, Rwanda, Tanzania, and also Tunisia participated, allowing these countries to address specific markets at preferential rates for certain products. The idea was that the selected countries would launch efforts to diversify and increase the exports among African countries through then export trading companies called ETCs. These companies then should identify products that can reach the markets inside the pilot nations. And hence, on the 23rd of September 2022, Kenyan-made Excite batteries arrived in Ghana under the auspices of the AfCFTA, and as such can be seen as the first trade 20 months after the launch of the AfCFTA. The GTI itself was only officially launched in Accra, Ghana in 2022, in the 7th October of 2022, which then can be seen as the start of commercially meaningful trade. Now, under this initiative, the GTI, the AfCFTA, the Secretariat, will assist the countries in testing the trading documents and procedures on pre-selected goods shipments among these 8 countries rather, and they identified 96 products, including tea, coffee, processed meat, sugar, and dried fruits, to be traded amongst the participating countries. And the idea then was that this number of products would increase threefold as the number of participating countries increases. Now, the AU, the African Union, described the specific objectives of the GTI as follows: to allow commercially meaningful trading under the AfCFTA, and then to test the operational, institutional, legal, and trade policy environment under the AfCFTA, and then thirdly, to send an important positive message to Africa's economic operators that there is meaningful progress in trading in Africa to increase the level of intra-Africa trade. The GTI then aims to convert paper progress into physical action to achieve Africa's industrial revolution and to boost its self-reliance. The ETCs, the export trading companies, their goal is to ensure that no one is left behind in the development of the regional value chains, specifically looking at small and medium enterprises, young entrepreneurs, startups, and light manufacturers. These ETCs will then provide the export and import services, warehousing, transportation, finance, insurance, risk management, and market intelligence, the whole value chain of trading to enable the AfCFTA to develop, to grow, to thrive. So as such, we can see that the ETCs are critical for the growth of smallholder farmers and traders by aggregating and purchasing goods in bulk. However, despite this, they have been quite ineffective in quite a number of African countries. But the GTI has seen a number of successes. I've referred to the Excite batteries that was exported from Kenya to Ghana. However, Kenya has also picked several other products for this program, including avocados, beaded goods, candy, car filters, fresh food, incinerators, leather bags, sisal fiber, tea, textiles, to name but a few. Other recent successes under the GTI includes Ghana receiving consignments of coffee and tea from Rwanda, and then the Ghanaian Customs Division issued a trading certificate on 30 September 2022 to a tile manufacturing company in Ghana called Kida Ghana Ceramics Company Limited to export its products to Cameroon. Now, what makes this interesting is that Kida Ceramics is a Chinese-owned company operating in in Ghana itself. However, Kida qualified under the rules that state that a foreign company operating in an African country that has signed on to the AfCFTA agreement qualifies to participate in trading if the raw materials for its production are sourced locally. In the case of Kida, 99.97% of its raw materials are acquired in Ghana. Now, allowing foreign operating companies to participate in trading activities if they do meet the requirements of the AfCFTA would then reportedly improve foreign direct investments into Africa. To demonstrate this principle, Nigeria invited Vietnam, which exports $336 billion US dollars annually, to use Nigeria as a gateway into the African market. This, however, will require Vietnam to source most of its raw materials in Nigeria, then boosting the economic situation in that country per se. We have also seen another Ghana-based company, the Benzo Oil Palm Plantation, which also said to export palm kernel oil to Kenya. And then we can see tea from Kenya and meat from Egypt going back to Ghana. In total, in the initial trades realized from these participating countries, we've seen about 100 potential trades. 14 companies with about 40 trades from Ghana, 27 companies with over 50 trades from Kenya, 7 companies with 20 trades from Egypt, 25 potential trades from Mauritius, 8 from Rwanda, and 4 from Cameroon. To further stimulate intra-African trade and to give this GTI a further boost, the Secretariat promised in January 2024 to increase the GTI for its current 8 members to 31 countries in 2024, which is excellent news. We also see South Africa, which is one of the largest economies in Africa and the most industrialized economy in Africa. Its President Cyril Ramaphosa attended the launch of South Africa's first preferential trading shipment under the GTI on 31 January this year, more than 3 years after the AfCFTA was launched, and despite the fact that the Secretary General of the AfCFTA is a South African. That shipment was sent to Ghana, and then there was another one also sent to Kenya, namely refrigerators and freezers. Now, it is interesting to note also that the Kenyan Trade Minister, Rebecca Miano, stated at that meeting that at that launch, Kenya will only import products not manufactured in Kenya in the future. In return, Kenya will export goods such as apparel, coffee, flowers, fruits, iron and steel products, tea and vegetables to South Africa. Now, if you look at it, what is the expectation of the members of the AfCFTA? For them, they believe and hope and expect the successful implementation of the AfCFTA would lead to the acceleration of growth, the broadening of economic inclusion, diversification of exports, increased productive capacity, increased investments, increased employment opportunities, and access to key markets in Africa for exports. This is what driven the move towards inclusion in the AfCFTA. Now, President Ramaphosa made an important point there. He said more effort is needed in the trade of services, because up until this stage, primarily it has been a trade in goods that has received more attention and moved faster than services. However, he believes that in getting a greater focus on the trade of services is the only way for African economies to grow faster and sustainably. Now, we've also seen, unfortunately, there's the negative side. We've seen, according to the World Economic Forum, they said that the seeming inability of African governments to remove tariffs and remove non-tariff barriers to trade is the primary constraint hindering, limiting the realization of benefits for African countries. That this is still the case 3 years after the launch of the AfCFTA is a severe indictment against African governments. Now, this is despite the fact that when you look at some of the stated benefits, it does not make sense. The AfCFTA can accelerate 3 key sectors, namely agriculture, pharmaceuticals, and then transport and automotive. This would create a single market at 1.3 billion people and potentially increase real income by nearly $450 billion US. Now, in the agriculture and agro-processing sector, intra-African trade in agriculture is expected to increase by a massive 574% by 2030. This is huge. Employ more than 50% of the working population and contribute 35% of Africa's GDP. It does not make sense to put anything in the way of such development. In the sector of transport and logistics, by 2030, it is seen that intra-African trade demand is expected to increase by 28%, with demand for also 2 million trucks, 100,000 rail wagons, 250 aircraft, and more than 100 vessels. And then looking at the pharmaceutical industry sector, intra-Africa trade must address the current low level of 3% of demand met by intra-Africa trade and strengthen health supply chains. Africa imports too much medication that can be produced locally. Now, many believe that coups and conflict are the most significant challenge the AfCFTA faces. You refer to the coups in Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, etc., as countries that are important for regional integration. To make things worse, these countries also announced in January 2024 that they are leaving the Economic Community of West African States, which will severely curtail regional trade in West Africa and dampen the progress of the AfCFTA in general. In East Africa, many refer to the civil war in Sudan that is contributing to the lack of integration of Sudan into the rest of the East African community. But he might as well have also highlighted the conflict in Eastern DRC, the conflict in Somalia, the insurgency in Mozambique, and the recent challenge to stability brought about by the agreement between Ethiopia and Somaliland. This agreement would have allowed Ethiopia to develop the port of Berbera in Somaliland as a naval base for Ethiopia, providing it access to the sea, which then the federal government of Somalia denounced as infringing upon its sovereignty. Now, PwC strategy and practice in West Africa highlighted 6 ways to transform intra-Africa trade. Firstly, to improve Africa's infrastructure, which requires $130 to $170 billion investment annually, to strengthen its institutional frameworks, to invest in upskilling and education at a large scale, to promote well-functioning markets and regional integration, to rebuild fiscal buffers, and to address non-tariff barriers. In another development, at the end of last year, a coalition of African commodity exchanges established the AfCFTA, Association of Commodity Exchanges, under the GTI to boost intra-Africa trade and confront the challenge of food insecurity. The goal there is to connect the farmers, the producers, and the buyers seamlessly to stimulate economic growth and address the pressing issue of food security. But despite the positive developments, the reality is the AfCFTA has not yet succeeded in dealing with Africa's economic challenges. If you look at the statistics I provided in the beginning, where there was actually deterioration, the progress we have seen has been slow and piecemeal. The challenges are familiar and well known, but the opportunities are huge. We're sitting with a market of 1.3 billion people, an urbanizing population growing its consumer class, and frequent calls for Africa to increase its local value addition instead of exporting raw materials. Suffice it to say that the AfCFTA agreement has a long way to go to make Africa economically independent. The elements for success are all present. Africa's leaders must embrace the opportunity, deal with the challenges, and implement the AfCFTA with greater energy and enthusiasm. To do anything less will be a tragedy. The small successes finally in implementing the GTI bode well for the future of the AfCFTA. As soon as the number of the participating countries and the scope of the products involved increase, we should see greater success in the AfCFTA. In the short to medium term, we're going to see initiatives such as the GTI, which is deemed to be necessary for the eventual success of the AfCFTA. I personally believe it will take longer before we see a full AfCFTA implementation in Africa, and we should look at Africa's leaders for more inspiration, more guidance, and to make it a much easier implementable initiative than what we are currently seeing.